And we are back to From Streets to Suites. Everybody clap it up. That was amazing getting to network and getting to know some of you in the room. I hope that we can continue to chat later. But what we're going to do now is we're going to have a fireside chat with all of our lovely speakers. And so we wanted y'all to ask us questions. But before we get into that, we wanted to talk a little bit about how you turn your network into your net worth. Like let's be real. At the end of the day, we all want to secure the bag. We all want to make sure that we have money in our pockets to live our lives the way we would like to live them. But in order to do that, it requires some type of expertise, and that expertise is around networking. So I wanted to ask all of you, and feel free to answer in any order you'd like, but how did you leverage your network in order to improve your net worth within your career?
Thank you. I think one of the things you should think about in relation to a network is defining it. There's a difference between networking and building a network. So one of the things that I've done is be very intentional about understanding what my network looks like, depending on what I want to do, whether it's career related and in my current profession, whether it's something else that I want to try or experiment with. It's really looking at like, who do I know in these spaces, or who do I need to know? And then once you have that understanding, then it's about getting out there and actually doing the networking, which is the action, whether it's showing up to like an event or having that conversation. I'll talk more about what I mean by like conversation, but that's the foundation of it for me that has made me successful in that regard, is thinking about what kind of network I want to build for that purpose. And it's okay to have different networks. A lot of times we think about, I have one network. It just depends on the thing that you want to do, and you benchmark where you are. So I'll stop there, and I'll definitely hand it over to anyone else who wants to make it.
I definitely agree. And one thing I would say is make sure that the people around you know what you like and what you're capable of. And so, from a selling perspective, if you have a business, your potential customers need to know what you're selling. And so from a marketing perspective, you are posting something and you're like, oh, I only have one like. But if you keep posting, people know that you are still in business. And so I would convert that to your network. Anybody that you're working with, anybody that you're friends with, talk about your interests. Talk about the things that you like to do, and what you want to do. Your current job is not going to be your final role. And I think it's okay to talk about the things that you see yourself doing in the future. And that's how I've gotten some positions. So, people around me in my network were able to say, oh, didn't you say that you liked X, Y, and Z? I know that that's not your current position. So and so is hiring for X, Y, and Z. You should let's have a conversation.
So for me, I'd say two things. One, I want to piggyback off of like filling the gaps in your network. So think about if you wanted to start a business as an example, and you could be really great in sales, you could be really great in marketing, but you could know that maybe you're not as strong when it comes to things like finance, like your numbers. So if you ever watch Shark Tank and you'll hear people talk about what's your cost of acquisition, what's your profit and loss numbers, like that's not always going to be a strength for everyone. So that's a gap you've identified in your network. So now you can go out and try to find someone who's skilled or more versed in that so that you can learn from them. So that's the one thing I would say about kind of plugging into that. And to Carell's point, remember you want your network to also be an advocate for you. So in order for them to be an advocate for you, they have to be really clear on what it is that you do and what your interests are. So there's a saying in the marketplace, if you confuse, you lose. So we all are multi-passionate and we all have lots of different interests. But when it comes to networking and you have a specific need or desire, you want to be very specific as to what that is so people know exactly how they can help you.
One thing I'll just add from my perspective, what's helped me is putting content out there, especially the fact that I'm in the DEI space. I've been in it before it sort of got very, very a hot commodity or whatever you want to call it. But I think working to consistently have those organic connections and have people organically find you based off your posts, find out, what's a big conversation right now when it comes to when you think about DEI, what are people talking about out there, and how can you provide your unique perspective or your spin or, thoughts based on what you've seen in your current role or previous role. I think that's a big piece because then I have people who just follow me that I've never heard of, and that might lead to something down the line, or someone may, reach out to my inbox and say, "Oh, I'm interested in this career path. Anything you can tell me about it? I saw your recent post." And then we're having a conversation. I think that's a big piece too. Always be open on the other side to be receiving of people who want your time. You may not always have the time, but you never know how person might remember you taking time out of your day. Like it could be 2 years later and all of a sudden they're in a position to help you find something. Maybe they have like a senior whatever position on their team. And like, I thought of you because you took the time to help me when I needed it. So make sure it's like that two-way street. You may not feel person has anything to offer you at that time, but and be wary of that. Don't do something in hopes that they help you out in the future. But I'm just saying, be open to every opportunity and every chance to connect with someone. So.
I just want to add one more thing. So years ago, when I had first gone into the podcast industry, I was invited to speak at this event. And I remember going through the list of attendees and looking for everyone who was a person of color because there weren't that many, right? So it was easy enough to look at. And then also determine like, okay, who seems like they maybe have a fit? Maybe we have something in common. So I actually found someone who also had grown up in the Bronx. And so I reached out to that person and said, hey, I'm also attending this conference. I'll be speaking. Do you have like 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get on the phone? I'd love to introduce myself to you before we get to this conference, which was going to be full of thousands of people. So I did, and we met, and she's my mentor still to this day. And so just simply by going out and trying to make that connection in a very low risk way of like, hey, we're going to be in the same space. I'd love to get to know you before we get into this gigantic room is a way that you never know what's going to come out of it. One of the best pieces of advice I'd gotten very early in my career is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you have to also be able to ask for what it is that you want. And that could just be a connection, a friendship, community, all of that. But the worst thing anybody could say is no.
The gems that were just shared, my goodness. Yes. I'm like, where's my notepad? I'm going to have to watch the re-record. I want to answer the question too, if that's okay. What's really interesting is I transitioned from being an accountant to being in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in order to do that, I said to my friend, let's go to a networking event once a week. So I went on Eventbrite. I searched up networking events for Black women. And once a week, I went to a random networking event. And I had to do that because in my family, I don't have people who work at Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Salesforce, SAP, Fortune 500, Expedia. I don't have those people in my family. So I had to go out and I had to meet those people. And in meeting those people, I was able to build connections where when a role came available for me, they said, okay, I'm going to refer her. And as many of you know, if you have a referral and getting a job, it's a lot better than you just applying on your own. And so through that, I was able to really leverage my net worth and get a lot more money. But then also knowing people inside companies, you can say, hey, what's the pay scale here? You can ask them ahead of time so you know what you're working with before you go into negotiations. We were all just saying earlier, you should definitely negotiate your salary at all costs, all times, never stop. But something that in talking about that, I wanted to ask you all, does anyone have any questions? I want to take a break to see if anyone has any questions for everyone that just shared. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for the gems that you dropped so far. But I also wanted some insight on how networking is relevant to some of the steps that all of you alluded to, which is making a jump, taking a next step. Sometimes people are making jumps towards things that are not necessarily as developed. So, in terms of networking and sponsorships and getting credibility for something that you're still trying to upskill and get good at, what would you or how would you recommend we leverage something like networking when you're not fully credible yet?
If I could jump in on that, a couple of tips is if you find people in your network, or if they're a loose tie and you see them doing things, follow their socials, comment, get curious about what they're doing. People love to talk about themselves. If you show that curiosity toward the things that they're doing, then they'll start to give you those insights. And I would say the other side of it is share some stuff, try things you're doing. So it's like, whether you have the expertise or not, if you're sharing it, if you're showcasing it, getting feedback from others, it opens doors for you to have conversations with those people who look like experts or you deem as experts. And when you come at them with that approach, it's very disarming, and people tend to be a lot more open. Whereas like, hey, I just saw you on this podcast, and this was this great point that you made about this. Hey, I'm working on this thing. You have 10 minutes to talk about it. I would love to gain some insight from you. So there's no pressure. There's no really strong ask about, hey, I need a job or I need this thing. You're just curious about what they're doing, and they'll give you all the game after that.
I was just going to say also that I don't think you need to have the credibility when you first want to make an introduction with somebody, right? I think the desire and the curiosity is really enough. And to build on the point, once you go in with a specific question, right? Because you think people are getting emails all the time and they have other requests. But when you can be really specific on your ask, that makes it clear for the other person to understand, can I help them? Am I the right person to help them? And also maybe, do I have the time to help them, depending on like the breadth of the ask, right? So I would say, again, never feel like you have to hesitate to reach out, because there's a bunch of people that are going to be in that industry that do that. When I gave the example before about the person in podcasting, I was very new. I taught myself how to podcast on my own. I didn't have the experience, but she was someone who saw something in me and said, hey, I want to help this person out, just by being there as a mentor. And we didn't speak all the time. We spoke maybe once a quarter. And recently she hired me to be the marketing lead for her company. And that was just basically going out there and just making this really simple introduction. I had no idea what it would become 5 years later. But even speaking so infrequently, I still stayed in her mind when she had a need for her company. So don't worry about the credibility. The credibility will come. You can still build a network at any level where you're at.
I wanted to just add one thing. I think don't worry about credibility. And I think if people tell you, like, no one knows exactly what they're doing. I'm gonna say it like that. No one knows what they're doing. And I think at every so I roll to C-suite. So it's like I report directly to CEO, CFO, COO. And the one thing that like is the common thread is they're problem solvers. So like problems are gonna continue to arise. And if you position yourself as like, I will work through this, like don't give up. And I think, I know you're saying credibility, but you're probably saying, hey, I'm new to this. How am I going to leverage a network? And I think their examples are great. So find people who are doing what you want to do and just have that conversation, open that and say, like, how did you get here? What did you do? The average person is not upskilling themselves. The average person is not reaching out like Monica is doing. I have a lot of these conversations. I ask a lot of questions. It's like I've been like that since a kid, and it's paid off because I'm not scared to talk to C-suite, and I'm in the rooms, and Black girl, I'm like, yes, I'll say something because I realize no one has the perfect answer. There is no right answer. And so your voice does matter. You know what I mean? Your perspective. So I think, you know, think of it like that. Like they're just like me. No one knows exactly the best way to solve this problem.
I would also like to add that you got to remain curious, and curiosity takes you a long way. So when I was transitioning, I said, I want to be in DI because I'm passionate about it. And everyone was like, that's cute, but your passion is not enough, girl. So I stalked the heck out of my DEI team when I was working at JetBlue. I took them to coffee. If they had an event, I stayed late to help clean up. I was just constantly there showing them that I wanted it. But then also at the same time, I was volunteering with other organizations who needed pro bono work. And I said, hey, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. I can do pro bono work for you. And so I started doing work for outside companies. And did I know what I was doing? Not at all. But I knew that I could figure it out. And they say that something with women that's really interesting is when we apply for jobs, we want to have 100% of the qualifications to say that we can make it. But men typically only have, especially white cisgender men, have 60% of the qualifications because they know the other 40% they can Google and figure it out. So I would say the same to you, is that continue to be curious, continue to be a problem solver, as Karel said. And something that I specifically did when I first got my role was I went to my interview and I brought them a 20-page presentation. And I was like, I don't have time to go through all this, but I'd love to leave this here with you. And it allowed them the time to reflect and see what I can produce. And I took a problem that I saw that was wrong with what they were doing, and I told them how they could fix it. And then I also pulled research from like Stanford and USC and somehow tied it in there to make it sound very, collegiate. And I got the job within 24 hours. So I think that sometimes too, you just have to, similar to what Monica was saying, think about how you can approach people in a way that other people aren't doing it. Like even when I reach out to people on LinkedIn, I say, hey, I saw you wrote this really interesting article. I just had some feedback for you. And they're like, oh, wow, someone actually took the time to read what I wrote and give me feedback. Okay, cool. Let me engage with them. So just think about how you continuously provide for other people, because usually when you do that, you get something in return. Awesome question. Yeah.
The LinkedIn thing works, y'all. So do that. Exactly what she said. Oftentimes people think of success, right, when they network and they've met the right person that put them in position. But what we don't talk about is the mindset shift that has to happen earlier. So can each of you share with us what was something that you had to release in your life to get to the success where you're at today?
That's a very good one. And I want to answer from the perspective as sometimes I have to relearn things too. Like it's like that never-ending process sometimes. But I think what's helped me, it even goes back to sort of what I was talking about earlier, is having something to affirm myself in terms of what have I accomplished, but then also taking it a step further and like what are the goals that I have for myself. So let me give an example. I put myself on the scale of someone who is very introverted. So in the past, I might tell myself, oh, like, I'm not gonna really go out there and share my opinion. It doesn't really matter. Or like they probably have other people who have more insights, whatever. So like I had to let go of that frame of mind where what I had to say was not as important or was less important than someone else's. And I think for me, that comes with like setting those small goals. Like, okay, I know I have this meeting today, an all team meeting. I'm going to set this goal. I'm going to speak at least once in it. I'm going to either ask a question once. I'm either going to say an insight based on something from my previous experience, just add value in some way so they know I'm in the room, know I'm actually there to, provide a perspective. So then you can check in at the end of the month. Okay, how many times did I achieve that goal? Okay, can I ramp it up now? Should it be 2 times every team meeting or something like that? So like those small shifts is really important. So it's goal setting, but also letting go of, all right, I just label myself as someone who's more introverted, but with that label, I'm deciding to have that determine how I will communicate or how I will, engage in these forums. So let me shift that and say, no, what's the goal I can set to actually take ownership, take control, reframe, and then reclaim what do I want to do? I want to show I'm there to, I'm a valued member of this team.
That was a great answer. That was a great answer. I would say for me, it's the idea that okay is better than perfect. I think in our communities, we often hit ceilings. We have to do, twice the work for half the recognition. And once you start to move from that mindset that I can iterate and I can try stuff, this event today is the brainchild of myself and Kayvon Lee trying stuff. So it's you continue to iterate and then you learn from those experiences. And I think as you start to learn, you do one of two things. You either, if it makes sense, you persevere and you keep pushing forward. If it doesn't make sense, you pivot. But you do that from a perspective of insight and experience. And that's the best thing I think for like shifting your mindset, is that giving yourself permission to say it's okay to try stuff and moving from that idea of fearing failure. Because what people often don't recognize is that in your failures are often your biggest lessons. And if you make that shift, you can definitely start to move into these spaces of success, because there's always some benefit in what you do.
For me, and it's a great question, I think it's the idea of letting go about rejection and really like not caring about rejection. So I think about Steph Curry. Does everybody know who Steph Curry is, right? So he's one of the most famous basketball players. He's an all-time three-point shooter. And his percentage is less than 40%, which means 60% of the time he's not making the shot, right? Like he's failing that shot. But if Steph went there and decided, I'm not going to shoot threes anymore, we wouldn't even be talking about him. He wouldn't even be in the conversation, right? We think about the same thing in baseball. A successful baseball player is bats 350, which means 35% of the time they're actually getting a hit or better, right? 35%, which means that 65% of the time they're not, right? So it's like, how are you redefining what rejection looks like? And just look at it like this. It can be a no, right? And that can be fine, right? It is a no. It can be a not now, or it can be setting you up for something better, right? So it's all about just kind of taking that, for me, that mindset of knowing that I'm going to put myself out there for so many different opportunities that like that one rejection isn't going to stop me from moving forward. And when you do that enough times, like it just kind of rolls off your back. And it's not to say that those things are less important or that you didn't want them, but they're not going to stop you. You're not going to stall because somebody told you no.
Can't stop, won't stop. Yes.
I love that. For me, it was removing the ceiling. So, like, I think it's important to see yourself in the roles that you eventually will be in. And how I did that was I joined a different network. Everything I used as excuses for myself to see myself in certain roles. Everybody had crazier stories or crazier backgrounds than I did. So as I said I'm an immigrant, and everybody around me was sort of settling for what I feel is like maybe minimum of what their capacity is. And I think exposing myself to people who just accomplished crazy things, it helped me remove the ceiling and realize that like I can do anything that I want to do if I put my mind to it.
And I would say I had to let go of what other people thought. For me, I'm really close to my parents, and everything in my career was like, I'm gonna make my mom proud. I'm gonna make my daddy proud. And then I forgot, am I making myself proud? And so I had to release the thought of doing something in my career for other people and instead doing something for myself. But something else I wanted to touch on, you mentioned, Gashard, measuring things. I feel like you like to measure things from my little bit of getting to know you. um, and I always say, if you can't measure it, it doesn't matter. And that's a phrase that I've stuck by my whole life. So I'm curious, what have you measured in your career to make sure, and this is for everyone, what have you measured in your career to make sure that you're achieving the success and the goals that you want to reach?
Money. Money. No, so okay, so there's a lot of groups. I love TikTok, y'all. There's a lot of places that you can go and check to make sure that you're being compensated correctly. So if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you're a man, doesn't matter. You should look and see how other people in your specific role are being compensated and then go higher, right? I think that like that's how I know, like, okay, all right, this is like how I measured, like, I was gonna talk in my accent, make it in a life. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm here, I've arrived. And I think that just look at the numbers. Like the average person in New York makes X, you know what I mean? And like, what do you want to do? And I think for me, I'm talking about money a lot because the reality is we need it to live, but it unlocks so much freedom. And I think, anybody of color, we have loans, we have debt. And I think it's something that you just take that away and then just like live. That's how I want to live. I want to do whatever I want to do. And that's why I push forward for the roles that I get and all the things that I do.
I just wanted to add to that, in saying that in all the folks that I've career coached and life coached in my work, and then also outside of my 9 to 5 work, there are three big levers, and money is definitely one of them. Corel, I find that most people are either seeking money, some sense of meaning or impact, or some sense of creative expression. And the challenge for most people is that they misalign things. They're like, oh, you know what? I'm a great poet. I should be making $1 million as a great poet. And yeah, maybe that should be the case, but that's not real life. So I think based on where you are, especially if you're like early stage in your career, if you're of color, if you're in different socioeconomic situations, if you just got out of school, when you look at those three levers, think of them like a mixing board. What's gonna be a priority? I need to make money because I got debt. I have things that are driving me. But then after a while, you achieve those money goals, then the other areas start to get a little louder. It's like, am I making an impact? Is this giving me meaning? And then so you start to make those changes and those pivots to dial those levers up or down, depending on where you are in your life and your career. So I say it's either money, impact, or some form of expression. Now there could be more to it, but I find those are the three things that tend to drive people.
I was just gonna add, completely agree with both of those, and I think I try to, at least something I've been trying to practice more recently is how is this sitting with me from a mental perspective, from a wellness perspective, when it comes Sunday, and some may have heard of the Sunday scaries or whatever you want to call them. Am I feeling this angst about starting the work week? Am I feeling this pressure that from my team or my environment or whatever it is? Am I feeling like this is a line from a mental perspective, or am I struggling with how it's affecting? Because mental health is going to lead to affecting your physical health. So it all connects. So you're going to need to, like Kason and Carol were saying, like when you think about those aspects and when maybe they're in that fulfillment stage at the time for you, then it's like, okay, mentally, am I there as well? Like, what are my measure? And yes, I guess like Morgan said, I do like to measure things, and I try to think about like what is something that's going to be a trigger for me to tell me I'm not mentally sound right now with this job or career path. So you need to think of those for you in advance so that when something's going off, an alert or something that says, actually, let me rethink how I'm approaching where I'm at, either at this company, on this team, in this, field, like, for example, like finance. I know a lot of people who worked in finance and have gotten burnt out just from the long hours and what you have to do there. So it's like, is that the field for you? Is there another way you can still work if you're passionate about numbers or what have you, but not in those environments of stress? So other things to consider as well.
So the last thing I'll say is I measure time, right? So I'll ask myself, when was the last time I learned something new? That'll be a big one. When was the last time I took a vacation? When was the last time I spent more than X amount of hours with my partner? Or there's all these different, as Kasan mentioned, levers that we have. And so for me, time is a very big one. How much am I really using my time to expand? Am I growing in all the ways that I want to grow, in all the ways that I want to stretch? If I feel, for me, stagnation, I'm not a happy camper with stagnation. So if I don't get that time to really, whether it's read a book, consume podcasts, write something on my own, find an opportunity to create, then I know that I'm not living in my most aligned way.
I love all of those because some of them I don't measure and I need to, like money. I've always thought that money comes and goes, and so I never really thought about it. And it wasn't until I got later in my career where I saw my white peers making 20,000 more than me and we were doing the same thing that I was like, hold up. This is why you're going to Greece and Mykonos and all these cool places, and I'm just going to New Orleans. Like, we gotta figure this out. So I had to shift my mindset a little bit there. But another thing that I like to measure is influence. So how can I influence other people? And when I was working in the finance world, there were some interns that came in and they were all making fun of this Black girl for wearing Ruby Roo red lipstick, if anyone knows lipstick colors. And they said it's so unprofessional. I can't believe she would do that, blah, 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 blah. I went up to her and I said, hey girl, maybe you don't want to wear Ruby Roo like during work hours. Maybe you should wear it after. And she said, these people don't dictate how I dress or how I come to work or my smarts or my brains. And she taught me something in that conversation. And so moving forward, she and I made an effort and a commitment to influence other Black and brown people who were just coming up in the organization to like be true to yourself. I was the first Black person to wear my hair natural at my job. And every Black woman was like, you need to straighten your hair. And I was like, actually, I don't. And just leaving that place and seeing over half the women wear their hair natural, I was like, okay, I had some type of influence and impact here. And the influence and impact doesn't always have to be like business related. Sometimes it can be human related. Because I feel like when you have an impact on someone's life, it goes beyond just like that check at the end of the day. Any more questions?
So, Morgan, you actually kind of got me into my next question. One of the things I like seeing right now is that we have such a diversity in this panel, diversity of thought, diversity of experience. I think one of the questions I'm really curious about learning is when you acclimate in your career and you start making those moves to the C-suite, how much of your authentic self can you bring into the room? I feel like as a person of color, we tend to deal with those challenges. Do I change my hair? Do I change how I speak? Do I change how I dress? Just so I can fit in or acclimate in a room. So as you guys are in your leadership roles and entrepreneurial stages in your careers, how do you find yourselves experiencing that?
Love that question.
So specifically when I decided to go into entrepreneurship, it was to do it the way that I wanted to do it, right? So very early in my career, I straightened my hair. I sort of played that game, right? I'm also, I've been in this for a long time, right? And so it was also a different time. And now I show up exactly as I am, right? And so it takes time to actually get there. And you also have to feel like you're comfortable though, in the sense of like who you are, because if you go in halfway, people know that you're going in halfway. You're not fully committed to like who you are. You're kind of one toe in the water. And if someone says something, you're going to go back and straighten your hair that night and show up and look the way that they want you to look, right? So you have to have that strong sense of self, which I think comes also with time and with experience. That's one. But then also when you go into entrepreneurship, you get to show up exactly as you are. You're not representing a brand other than yourself. So the masthead behind you doesn't belong to someone else that signs your checks. You're doing that for yourself. And the beauty about entrepreneurship is you also get the opportunity to decide who you want to work with and who you want to serve. And so if someone doesn't like the way you're showing up, of how you present, the clothes that you wear, your hairstyle, makeup, no makeup, kicks, heels, whatever that is, then that person really isn't for you, right? And that's a hard decision to make, and it comes with a lot of reconciling that has to happen within you, because when you're starting your business, the first thing is protect the profit or make the profit if you haven't generated anything. But the longer you're true to yourself and the more you stay grounded in your sense of self, it will only serve you as you move forward.
That's a great answer. And to add to what you're saying, Monica, like at the end of the day, know your why. You know, C-suite. Some people think about like that's a goal. And it's like if you're not building your own dream, you're working to build someone else's dream. So there's no wrong way to approach it. You know, you can have the aspiration to get in the room, but understand why you want to be in the room. Are you trying to earn a seat at the table and work at their table? Are you looking to build your own table and just get your at bats and understand, how these things work? I think once you have an understanding of your why toward those movements, then you can align yourself into everything she said. It's about your holistic self and knowing where you have opportunities to push and pull. So the beauty of entrepreneurship and experimenting and trying stuff is that in your main thing, you may not be able to pull certain levers, but in the thing that's about you, for you, about who you serve, you can now express those other elements. So I look at every opportunity as a way to create that awareness for yourself and how far you want to go.
I think something you said in your question is so important is diversity in thought. And so as I'm learning more about diversity, which there's experts here in the audience as well as on the panel, diversity is thought, is background, is socioeconomic, is a lot of different things. And so when I'm in these rooms and, on my way to the C-suite, I think about that, where I try to show up as my most authentic self because I'm a diverse thought, like my thoughts matter, and I can't conform to everybody because then we're going to keep having the same sort of like, the same outcomes. You get what I'm saying? And so I think that I chose a role like currently, and I try to choose roles that I feel comfortable and my voice is heard. But I think, yes, it's something that I think through and navigate. even my thoughts, something that Morgan just said about the Ruby Woo lipstick. And I think through some of the people of color that I've worked with in the past, and I'm like, ooh, girl, you are a do-rag to work. You know, and I'm like, should I say something? And I'm like, whatever. Why? Like, she showed up, and is that affecting her role? Like, is that affecting her work? Why am I sitting here saying something to her? So I didn't. But I think that's also diversity. You know, she was like, I have a concert later. I want to keep my hair like in a, you know, a doobie or whatever she wanted to do. And I don't know. You know, you guys know what I mean. But like, she wanted to keep it tight. You know, like, you know, she wanted to keep it right before her concert after work. So does that matter what's on her head? And so I think about, I have to show up as my authentic self, because then the people that come after me, you know, like there's going to be other girls with head wraps on or different types of clothes. And I think that's a part of the diversity that needs to have a seat at the table in thought.
It's interesting because sometimes when I think about that, I think it can end up being like a balancing act of what makes sense even in that moment or on your journey, or you know, as you discover yourself, and it may change. And I think as a almost like taking a step back, it goes back to, what is your outlet? What does your safe space look like for, let's say you do, you know, you can do everything to try to assimilate and someone can still say a microaggression or still can exclude you. So what's your outlet, and what are you doing to make sure you have a safe space? I can think back to times where, you know, at previous companies I worked for, something happened on a team, let's say an act of exclusion, and we came together as an ERG, a Black ERG specifically, and thought, okay, what are some of the changes we can do right now in our power? It started with a town hall across the company, but it led to including diversity goals for leaders, which cascaded down to their team. So even something like a small thing, it goes back to, okay, if you have an outlet, you can almost foster change through that community that you have. So it's like a tangent to your question, but also to say, uh, you don't know how assimilating or standing out will still have an impact based on how other people perceive you. Like, I think unfortunately people are still going to end up having their stereotypes or having their perceptions, which is just the unfortunate truth right now. But then we have to say, okay, what can we still do that's in our power?
We only have a few minutes left, but I would like to add, my daddy always told me, don't hate the player, hate the game. And when I say that, what I mean is like, I don't need to go into a space where I have to hate myself, where I can't be myself. And if I'm in a space where I have to hate myself in order to fit in there, then maybe it's not the space for me. And that's different for everybody. Like, I have some friends who to this day, they still straighten their hair. And I'm like, girl, you're gonna get this fro. Like, it is what it is. And if a company doesn't want me for that, then that's on them. But another thing is, as you move up in the C-suite, it becomes very political. And I think that you have to decide, do I want to deal with the politics? And I ask myself from this political standpoint, who am I? Am I Obama? Am I Trump? Am I Biden? Am I Bush? I'm just thinking about the presidents that I can remember. And they all had different impacts of influence. You know, some influenced ignorance and some influenced change and hope. And so how am I making an influence in the organization when it comes to a political standpoint? And if I'm not making an impact and I'm fighting, and no one's listening, I need to go. I think that sometimes we hold on too long because we want to make it to that C-suite position, but there's so many positions out there that it doesn't mean that one company is a place that you have to stay, especially if they make you hate yourself. I'm not saying that you do, but do we have any? Yeah.
All right. Each of you shared some amazing stories today and shared wonderful gems with us. So I would like to know what in your stories, right, in the next chapter of your lives, what is the title and why?
Fancy question.
GM. This is a very good question. I'm a marketing director, but I'm over a mini business within a bigger business. And that means I look at profit and losses, I look at growth opportunities. So I'm a growth marketer. And what I want to do is manage all things of the business. So operations, hiring, and then other mini businesses within that one. So why? I think it'll give me bigger exposure. So I've had a few businesses of my own. On my own money. So like all the losses were on me in my pockets and all the gains were on me for sure. But this is, and when my boss hired me, she was like, Corel, let's try this with other people's money. You know, when we get partnerships and investments. So now I want to generally manage a mini business with other people's money. So anything I lose, it's a loss for sure, but it's not on me. And I think it'll help set me up for sort of that C-suite mentality.
My answer would be, if it's a catchphrase, it would be the idea of design for life. So what I mean by that is, from a professional work standpoint, it's helping organizations become skill-based organizations. So democratizing the idea of roles and titles and really looking at the talent and what people can do to make them sustainable. So that's where I'm going from a leadership perspective, and designing those facets for organizations. On the flip side of that coin of design for life, it's thinking about individuals and what kinds of skills do they need to move forward in this world that we're in today. Because as I said in my presentation, the only constant is change. So it's not about having all the right skills right now, but it's having the mindset and having a tool set to know that, hey, when the temperature changes, when the market changes, I know what I need to do to make moves to figure out what's next. Because if you're first in line to do that, then you'll always be forever employable and you'll always thrive in whatever you do.
I'll say that right now I'm a manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I'd say it's almost like adding to what I consider my title, and being a DEI consultant is something that's important to me. So leveraging everything I've learned already, and how can I then influence companies, external them from my own? Because as you can imagine, with all these companies that have popped up with these DEI roles and these DEI councils or whatever the case may be, not all of them had the strategy behind it or the thought of what are they actually wanting to accomplish. How does it connect to like the business and business goals, what have you. So I think just having that expanding of my frame of influence and what I can say I've strategically had an impact on, I'd say.
For me, it would be legacy. So I've lived, I feel like 1,000 lifetimes sometimes. I had a pretty tumultuous upbringing. So I lost my family by the time I was 23. And so I spent a lot of my career in the beginning stages just really trying to survive. And I prayed a lot to walk in the purpose that was meant for myself. And now that I feel like I'm walking in that purpose, I think of legacy, so that everything I do, I can be of service to other people, whether it's planting a thought, an idea, an inspiration, an actual strategy. How can I influence my niece, who is not my bio niece, but it feels like she is? And I think about that all the time. What is the legacy that I'm going to leave, and how will I be remembered? And that's how the intentionality that I use to approach the next steps in my career.
I would say I would title mine Finding Self. I think I'm in a stage in my career where I pivoted again. So now I do fashion event production, and I love it. But I also think it's challenging me to find out more parts of myself and who I am. And we were talking about this earlier, Kason and I, about how people take their work and their life and they kind of go down two separate paths. But if you really want to like holistically have a comfortable life, your work and your life need to connect, you know? And they need to connect in a way, something that Gashard said as well earlier, from a mental health perspective. I've been in some work situations where my mental health was not all together. And I had to pull it together, but I don't want to live a life of pulling it together. I want to live a life that I get excited to go to work. I get excited to make an impact, to make an influence, and to make a change. So I would say finding self. I think I'm just still trying to discover what I want for my future, and I think that's okay. Thank you.
It is okay.
The last question I want to ask before we close out is if you could give everyone here, Kason, something you talked about in your presentation earlier today was accelerating, right? So what piece of advice could y'all give to everyone here on how to accelerate within their careers and how to move up in the C-suite?
I'm happy to kick that off is uh, know your why and know where you are right now. A lot of people shoot for goals, but they don't really understand where they are. So they're shooting for targets and not knowing the pieces of what's missing in order to get there. So if you do that intentional work to cast a vision for yourself to the point that you reinforced again, Morgan, to understand what are your work values, what are your life values, and how to bring those things more holistically together, whatever it is, you're going to be a lot more productive and you're going to accelerate because you're going to stick to those things because you're creating alignment based on you, not based on ideas that are outside of you.
I would say, I guess it's almost twofold. I'd say be prepared before the opportunity presents itself. I think a lot of the times we're waiting for the opportunity to then say, okay, I'm going to get ready for this. Now I'm going to like work up to that. No, you have to do that background. No one's going to see all the hours you put in and everything you put in to actually prep yourself from what you're reading, what you spend your time on the weekend doing, you know, who you're talking to. What are those hours when maybe someone else isn't prepping that you can take advantage of and, you know, make sure you're ready when something presents itself. And I'd say also when it does arrive, even if it's not aligned, be memorable. Find a way to be memorable for the right reasons, because I've had interviews in the past as examples that maybe when I learned more about that particular role, it didn't end up being a good fit. But because I did the prep, the background work, that person remembered me and remembered how I spoke about my field and what I did, you know, to from building out a website and building out certain things to show I'm invested in this field and this practice, to then say, you know, come back to me. This is like a year later and say, hey, we have a different role that opened up that seems more aligned to what you want to do. And that was because you know, I was honestly shocked at the time because that was the first time it happened where someone like reached out after not talking for a while, but apparently I had some impact and I was, you know, memorable to that person. So I'd say find your way to, you know, be impactful.
I would say define what sweet means to you. So in some instances, it can be the C-suite. In others, it could be a suite at Madison Square Garden. It could be the suite that you decide to reserve when you go on your next vacation, or it could just be the sweet life that you create for yourself. So have that self-definition of what sweet means to you, because it doesn't have to look for you the way that it might look for some of us. You get to decide what you want that to be.
I would say stay open. I think a lot of things have come to me and I'm like, oh, this doesn't look and feel right. But I think you just stay open. I learn from anyone, from a 5-year-old, from 55-year-olds. And I think that has helped me a lot. So in work positions, I try to listen a lot more than I'm speaking, because a lot of people have things that they can teach you. So I try to stay open to that.
And finally, I would say research. If you're trying to become the next TikTok star, you better watch TikTok every day and research the heck out of it. Think big, y'all. I I think that when it comes to anything like doing your research, I try to read at least 3 memoirs a year because I like to read people's stories to see how they got to where they were and to learn from them, which is something I think everyone kind of touched on, learning in general. So I would say learning and research. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Kason, so much for putting this together. And Kayvon, thank you so much. Y'all are amazing. Pop it up. And if you want to learn more, stay tuned into From Streets to Suites in general. There's going to be more events coming up in the future. If not, I will make sure there are, and I'll bully you, Kason, to make sure that you have more. But thank you all so much for coming today, and I hope you have a good rest of your weekend.